I'm Michael, a former Marine. I moved to this quiet farmhouse in Iowa, hoping to leave behind the war memories that haunted me. It was supposed to be my escape, but it turned into a nightmare. The place was close to my late father's land. I thought being there would help me reconnect with simpler times. I had my dog, Buddy, and my best friend, James, living nearby. It felt right at first, but the war had left its mark on me. I suffered from PTSD, severe anxiety, and hypervigilance. Every little noise, every shadow put me on edge. But on the farm, things seemed better. I had a routine, and that routine kept me sane. At least, that's what I thought. One day, while cleaning out the basement, I noticed a door I'd never seen before. It was locked, old, and looked like it hadn't been touched in years. My curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a crowbar and pried it open. The door creaked, revealing a hidden room filled with the most disturbing paintings I'd ever seen. "James, you gotta see this," I called him over the phone, my voice trembling. When he arrived, we stood there, staring at the paintings. Each one was so lifelike. It was like the people in them could walk right out of the frames. And then I saw them, paintings of my family, including James. They showed their deaths in gruesome detail. "What kind of sick person paints stuff like this?" James muttered, his face pale. I didn't have an answer, but from that moment my life started to unravel. The farmhouse that was supposed to be my sanctuary became a place of horror. And the more I looked into those paintings, the more I realized that someone had been watching us for a long, long time. After finding those paintings, things around the farmhouse began to feel. It was difficult to explain at first. Just little things that nagged at the edges of my mind. Buddy, my loyal German shepherd, was the first to notice. He'd sit by the basement door, ears perked, growling softly at nothing. One evening, James and I were having a beer on the porch, the sun setting behind the fields. "You think too much about those paintings," James said, trying to lighten the mood, but his eyes betrayed his own unease. "You didn't see what I saw, James," I replied. "Those paintings, it's like they're watching us." James nodded slowly, glancing around it. "Maybe we should get rid of them, burn them." I didn't want to admit it, but the thought had crossed my mind. Still, something held me back. Perhaps it was my own morbid curiosity, or maybe a sense of dread that destroying them might unleash something worse. The next few days were filled with small, unsettling events. Objects I knew I'd left in one place turned up in another. Doors I'd closed were found ajar. At night, the farmhouse creaked and groaned as if it were alive. Sometimes I thought I heard whispers in the walls, too faint to make out the words, but chilling nonetheless. One night, I woke up to the sound of Buddy barking furiously. I stumbled out of bed and followed him to the basement door. His hackles were raised, and his barking echoed through the house. I tried to calm him, but he was relentless, scratching at the door. "What is it, boy? What's down there?" I whispered, my voice shaking. I opened the door slowly, and Buddy bolted down the stairs, growling and barking at the darkness. I followed, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the musty air, revealing the eerie paintings. They seemed different now, more vivid, more real. The eyes of the painted figures seemed to follow me, their expressions twisted in silent screams. I heard a rustling behind me and whipped around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and the flickering light of the flashlight. "Michael, you're losing it," I muttered to myself, backing away slowly. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. As I turned to leave, my flashlight caught a glint of something on the floor. I bent down and picked up a small, rusty key. It was old, and I had no idea what it might open. But holding it made my skin crawl, and I shoved it into my pocket. The farmhouse felt different after that night. Colder, darker. Every creak and whisper seemed amplified. and that feeling of being watched never left. The unease settled in my bones, and I knew I had to find out what was happening before it consumed me entirely. What I didn't know was that the true horror was just beginning, and those paintings were only the first piece of a much darker puzzle. Ever have those moments when the people you trust the most start to seem like strangers? That's what began happening to me and James. After the night in the basement, my nerves were shot. The feeling of being watched, the strange occurrences, they were wearing me down. James noticed, of course. He wasn't the type to let things slide. "Michael, you look like hell," he said one morning, standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee. "You're not sleeping, are you?" I shrugged, staring into my own coffee as if it held answers. "Buddy's been acting weird in those noises at night. I can't shake the feeling that something's off." James set his cup down with a thud. "Listen, man, we need to get a handle on this. You've been through a lot, but you can't let it get to you. Let's go down there and get rid of those damn paintings." I nodded, though my gut churned at the thought. "Maybe you're right," I said, though part of me wasn't convinced. As we made our way to the basement, Buddy followed, tail low and ears back. I noticed something then. A small crack running along the wall of the staircase, as if the house itself was fracturing under the pressure of something unseen. When we reached the basement, the paintings seemed to pulse with a life of their own under the harsh light. James grabbed one of them, a particularly gruesome depiction of him lying lifeless, and moved to toss it aside. "Wait!" I shouted, surprising even myself with the intensity of my voice. James paused, looking at me with a mix of frustration and concern. "Michael, we can't let these things control us," he said, his voice steady but strained. "We need to take back control." I swallowed hard, fighting the rising panic. "I know, James, but there's something about them. It's like they're warning us." James sighed, dropping the painting back onto the pile. "You can't keep letting the past haunt you. You have to face it." His words hit harder than he knew. He didn't understand what it was like to live with constant hypervigilance, the feeling that danger lurked around every corner. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my mind wandered back to my days in the service. The camaraderie, the trust we had in each other. It was all so different from the paranoia I felt now. I could hear Buddy pacing outside my bedroom door, his nails clicking on the wooden floor. It mirrored my own restless thoughts. I couldn't help but think about the key I'd found. It felt heavy in my pocket, a physical reminder of the mysteries I hadn't yet unraveled. What if there was more to the basement, more than just the paintings? What if this key unlocked something I wasn't prepared to face? The next day, tension between James and me grew. We argued about the paintings, about the strange occurrences, about my sanity. "You need help, Michael," he said bluntly. "This isn't just about the paintings. You're seeing things that aren't there." I felt anger bubble up. "You think I'm crazy? You don't know what it's like, James. The things I've seen, the things I've done, they don't just go away." James' face softened, and he put a hand on my shoulder. "I know you've been through hell, but you don't have to face this alone. Let me help." But could he help? Could anyone? The lines between reality and my fears were blurring, and I wasn't sure I could trust my own mind anymore. The farmhouse was supposed to be my refuge, but now it felt like a prison. That night, I decided I had to find out what that key unlocked. Had to face whatever was lurking in the shadows of my own mind. And this cursed farmhouse. I waited until the house was silent, until even Buddy had settled down. Then, with a flashlight in hand and the key burning a hole in my pocket, I crept down to the basement. The air was thick with tension, and as I stood before the paintings, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing, just the oppressive darkness. I turned back to the wall where I'd found the key. My hands shook as I inserted it into the small, almost invisible lock in the wall. With a click, a hidden door swung open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passageway. My heart raced as I stepped inside. knowing that whatever lay ahead could shatter my already fragile grasp on reality. But I had to know. I had to face it. Because sometimes the only way out of the darkness is to walk straight into it. The narrow corridor was suffocating, the walls closing in on me as I moved forward. The dim light flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced on the damp stone. My breath echoed in the confined space, each step a reminder that there was no turning back. As I moved deeper, I found myself in a small room. The air was thick with the smell of mold and something else. Something metallic. Blood. My flashlight beam landed on a collection of canvases, each more horrifying than the last. But the worst part was the fresh painting standing in the center of the room. It was me. Lifelike and terrifying, it depicted me standing in that very room, eyes wide with fear. My heart pounded in my chest. Someone had been watching me. "Welcome, Michael," a voice said, sending chills down my spine. I spun around, the flashlight beam catching the silhouette of a man, the basement painter. His eyes glinted with madness, and his smile was one of twisted delight. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling but defiant. "To perfect my art," he replied, stepping closer. "To capture the essence of fear, your fear." I backed up, hitting the wall. "You're sick." "Am I?" he mused, tilting his head. "Or am I the only one who sees the truth? That fear is the most honest emotion." At that moment, something snapped inside me. All the fear, the anxiety, the memories of war. They collided in a storm of rage. I lunged at him, tackling him to the ground. We grappled, the flashlight rolling away, casting erratic beams of light. He was strong, but my military training kicked in. I managed to pin him down, but his laughter echoed in the small room, taunting me. "You can't escape your fears, Michael. They're part of you." I raised a fist to strike him, but something held me back. His eyes, wild, and yet, somehow, familiar. In a twisted way, he was right. My fears had driven me to this point, and now they threatened to consume me. He took advantage of my hesitation, throwing me off balance. We fought brutally, each strike fueled by desperation. In the chaos, I inhaled some of the hallucinogenic compounds he used in his paintings. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin. Images flashed before my eyes, visions of my own death, my loved ones' faces twisted in horror. But instead of paralyzing me, they fueled my determination. I had to end this, for their sake and mine. With a surge of strength, I grabbed a nearby canvas and smashed it over his head. The wooden frame shattered, and he crumpled to the floor, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. I stood over him, panting, the room spinning around me. "You think you can stop me?" he rasped, coughing up blood. "I'm part of this house, part of you." I kicked him aside, my mind racing. "Maybe, but I won't let you control me." I stumbled out of the room, the narrow corridor now feeling like it was closing in even more. I made my way back to the basement, each step a struggle against the hallucinations that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Back in the main basement, I collapsed against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Buddy's bark echoed from upstairs, grounding me. I had to get out of there, had to find some semblance of sanity. But as I moved to leave, I noticed something. Another hidden door, slightly ajar. My heart sank. There was more. There was always more. I pushed the door open, revealing a small, hidden room filled with incomplete paintings. Each one depicted a potential future victim, including myself, in various gruesome scenarios. My stomach churned at the sight, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I had to destroy it all. The paintings, the passageways, the darkness that had taken root in my home. I grabbed a nearby gas can and started dousing the room. As the fumes filled the air, I lit a match and tossed it into. Flames roared to life, consuming the twisted arty. I stumbled back up the stairs, the fire spreading quickly. Outside, the night air was a relief against my burning lungs. I watched as the farmhouse, my supposed sanctuary, went up in flames. James arrived, eyes wide with shock. "Michael, what the hell happened?" I shook my head, too exhausted to explain. "It's over," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was convincing him or myself. As we stood there, watching the fire, I knew one thing for certain. The horrors of the past might never truly leave me, but I had faced them. And for now, that was enough. But as the flames died down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the basement painter's legacy wasn't entirely gone. The shadows seemed to whisper, reminding me that true fear never really dies. It just waits. The fire had destroyed the twisted paintings in the hidden rooms, but something still felt wrong. James stayed with me that night. We sat on his porch, the cool night air a stark contrast to the chaos we had just escaped. Buddy lay at my feet, his presence a small comfort. "You did the right thing, Michael," James said, handing me a fresh cup of coffee. "That place was cursed." I nodded, though a part of me wasn't so sure. The fire should have ended it, but the unease in my gut wouldn't go away. "Thanks, James, for everything." James leaned back, staring into the night. "So what's next? You gonna rebuild?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe it's time to move on, find somewhere new." Just as I started to feel a hint of relief, Buddy began to growl. His hackles rose, and he stared into the darkness beyond the porch. I felt my skin prickle. "What is it, boy?" Buddy's growl deepened, and then I heard it too. A faint rustling in the bushes. James grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the darkness. For a moment, the beam caught a figure, but then it was gone. "Probably just a raccoon," James said, but his voice lacked conviction. The next morning, as I sifted through the remains of the farmhouse, I found something that made my blood run cold. Amid the ashes was a small, charred box. Inside there were letters, correspondence between the previous owners and someone named M. The letters hinted at dark rituals and sacrifices, but there was something else. A mention of a hidden safe in the barn. I showed the letters to James. "This can't be real, right? Some kind of sick joke." James frowned. "It's hard to say, but we should check the barn just to be sure." The barn was old and creaky, filled with the scent of hay and dusted. We searched every inch, and just when I was about to give up, James called out, "Over here!" Behind a loose board, we found a small safe. My hands trembled as I dialed the combination mentioned in the letters. The safe clicked open, revealing an old leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to the basement painter. It detailed his descent into madness, his obsession with capturing fear, and his belief that he could transfer his soul into his paintings. But there was more. A plan to continue his work through someone else. James and I exchanged uneasy glances. "It's like he knew you'd find this," James said. That night, as I tried to make sense of the journal, more strange things happened. Buddy disappeared again, only to return hours later, his fur matted and eyes wide with fear. Objects in James' house started moving on their own, and the whispers returned, louder than before. One night, as I sat with the journal, I heard a knock at the door. It was a stranger, a woman with wild eyes and a frantic demeanor. "You have to stop it," she pleaded. "The fire won't end it. The painter's spirit lives on." James came to the door, trying to calm her. "Who are you?" "My name is Sarah," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm the daughter of the last owner. I ran away when I was a child, but I've been drawn back here. The painter, he's chosen someone new." I didn't want to believe her, but the evidence was mounting. The fire, the journal, the strange occurrences. It all pointed to one terrifying possibility. The basement painter's spirit wasn't gone, and now it seemed he was trying to possess someone else. But who? Was it me, James, or someone we hadn't met yet? The fear I thought I'd banished returned with a vengeance. The clues were leading us in circles, each one more misleading than the last. We were chasing shadows, and the painter's legacy was a maze of lies. And as I stood there, holding the journal, I realized the nightmare was far from over. The real horror was just beginning, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The farmhouse, the fire, the journal. It all left scars deeper than any wound I got in the war. James and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, even in broad daylight. Every creak in the house, every shadow flickering at the edge of our vision, felt like the basement painter's unseen hand reaching out from beyond the grave. James tried to keep things normal, but I could see the strain. He'd always been my rock, but now he was crumbling too. "Michael, we have to find a way to end this," he said one night, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "For good." I nodded, though I didn't know how. The journal had hinted at a ritual to bind the painter's spirit, but it required confronting our deepest fears, and I wasn't sure if I could handle that. My mind was already a battlefield. "Do you really think it'll work?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if it just makes things worse?" James sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, but we have to try. Otherwise, we're just waiting for him to take over." That night, we prepared for the ritual. It involved symbols and chants that felt ancient and powerful. The journal said we needed to face our fears head-on, to call out the painter's spirit and bind it forever. As we started, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in. We stood in a circle, Buddy at our feet, and began the chanty. At first, nothing happened. Then, the room started to shake, and the temperature plummeted. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling our heads with doubts and fears. "Michael, stay focused," James shouted over the noise. But it was hard. The memories of the war, the faces of my fallen comrades, all flashed before my eyes. I could see them, hear their screams. I glanced at James, his face contorted in concentration. "I can't do this," I muttered. But then, I saw Buddy. His loyal eyes locked on mine, and I knew I had to try. For him, for James, for myself. We continued the chant, the words almost a scream now. The room seemed to warp around us, and then the basement painter appeared. His face was a mask of rage and madness. "You think you can defeat me?" he hissed. "I am fear itself. I live in your minds, in your hearts." "No!" I shouted back, the power of the chant giving me strength. "You're just a man, a twisted, broken man, and you will not control us." With those words, a blinding light filled the room. The painter screamed, his form dissolving into shadows that writhed and then vanished. The house fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. We stood there, panting, the reality of what we'd done sinking in. The ritual had worked, or so it seemed. Days passed, and things started to feel normal again. The strange occurrences stopped, and the whispers faded. But the psychological impact remained. James and I were changed, haunted by what we'd faced. Buddy stayed close, sensing our unease. One evening, as we sat on the porch, James broke the silence. "Do you think it's really over?" I didn't know how to answer. The fear was gone, but the doubt lingered. "I hope so," I said, "but I'm not sure if we'll ever really know." A week later, I found a painting in my attic. It was new, fresh. It showed James and me, sitting on the porch, looking exactly as we did now. And in the background, barely visible, was the faint outline of the basement painter's twisted smile. I called James over and we stared at it in horror. "He's still here," I whispered, feeling the cold grip of fear return. "Somehow, he's still here." James nodded, his face pale. "We need to leave, Michael. We need to get as far away from this place as we can." We packed our things that night, leaving the farmhouse behind. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. The painter's legacy wasn't confined to the house. It was part of us now, a shadow that would never fully fade. And as we started a new chapter, I knew one thing for certain. True fear never really dies. It just waits for the right moment to return.